We're going to look. So tonight we're going to look at a Mishnah on Daf Mem Beis, and we're going to talk a little bit about some laws of Pesach for next week, and we're going to try to connect the two. Okay. So the Mishnah on Daf Mem Beis says as following. The Mishnah says, Hamafkid Ma'os Etzel Chavero. Okay, we're talking about the laws of guarding money. Okay, how do we guard money? What's the proper way of guarding money? So if I give you, if I have a shomer who's watching my money, Saran v'shil na'acharav, and he decides to bundle it together, okay, and put it over his shoulder. Or if he elected to have one of his family members, which is fine, but however, they're katanim. So if they're watching the money, shalo kara'u, and it was closed, right? It was put away inappropriately, chayav. Shaloshim or kederach hashomrim. These shomrim, right? Again, the discussion what kind of shomer it is, but obviously it's a shomer that is chayav, right? If something happens to it. So this is not considered an appropriate way of guarding money. Okay, the Gemara is actually going to, we're not going to get to it, but you should know that the Gemara comes to the conclusion, according to one opinion, that the only proper way to guard money is actually to bury it. Okay, to bury it in the ground. That's the only way a person could properly watch money. Okay, that is what the Gemara is going to say. V'im shimor, the Mishnah ends off by saying v'im shimor kederach hashomrim pater. But if you guarded it correctly, then you're exempt. Okay, the shomer is pater if something happened to the money. So let's try to be a little bit more specific and explain what the problem that the shomer encountered is. Why is he, in fact, why is he considered negligent? So Bishlam Akulu, so the Gemara says, I understand when it comes to guarding money, Shaloshim or Kaderach HaShomrim, right? If you did something, you gave it to someone else who you shouldn't have, right? If you didn't lock it up properly, then you were negligent. However, but if I tie up the money and I put it in one, right? They used to tie it up in like a towel or a handkerchief, let's say, and it's all in one wad, right? Tightly secured, right? And I'm wearing it like in a backpack. So my Havalela Mehmed, what else do you want the guy to do? Right? Why is he guilty? Why is he responsible? So Amarav Amar Bitzak Amar Krav Tzarta HaKesef Biyadecha. So we quote a pasuk, which is not talking about shomer per se. It's talking about, and we had this pasuk quoted on the daf recently on Shabbos. This is talking about Meiser Sheni money that has to be brought to Yerushalayim. So the Torah implores everyone, if you can't or if you don't want to schlep all your fruit, you exchange it to cash, and the cash is sarta hakesef biyadacha. The cash is then tied together in your hand. So the Gemara says, "Afal pishet srurin yihiyu biyadecha." The point is that even though they are tied, even though the money is like in rubber bands, right? The way we, let's say, bundle cash together, right? So even though the bundle of cash is together in rubber bands, the problem is it can't be in back. It can't be in a backpack. It can't be in back of you. The Gemara says it has to be in your hand. And because the shomer did not do this, so he's considered negligent. Okay. So on this topic, the Gemara veers off a little bit into Samagadata, and says, "V'amar Rav Yitzchak la'olam yihei kaspa shel adam matsui biyado." A person should always have money found in his hand. Shenem v'tzarta kesef biyadecha. Now, the word matsui means readily available, as opposed to money that is not liquid. Okay, so now the Gemara is not going to interpret this literally, that you should walk around all day with all your cash in your pocket. That's not a wise move. But what Gemara is trying to say, that you should have cash available for business opportunities. Meaning, you can't have it tied up, or you shouldn't have it tied up in real estate, in assets that can't liquidate quickly. But if you need money for something, and you don't have it, say, okay, well, I'll put my house for sale, and it could take 8 months to sell your house, and you'll blow that opportunity. So the Gemara is giving here and in the next few lines, basically financial advice as to how to have cash available at all times. And now, because we said one, expression on financial planning, we're going to continue and see what other words of wisdom the Gemara has. Okay, we like to split everything in thirds, right? Like Tanakh, just like the Gemara says, you have to learn a third Mikra, a third Mishnah, right? So here too also, when it comes to dividing up your assets, your financial planner should keep in mind, right? Forget the 60-40 stock bond portfolio. Just have your assets divided this way, says Rav Yitzchak. A third in cash, okay, in your money market. Shlish b'karka. A third should be in real estate, okay. Shlish b'karka, ushlish b'prakmatya, ushlish tachas yada. Okay. A third invested in business, and a third, I'm sorry, the first one, bakarka, means you should actually have it buried. It's a discussion how to learn it exactly, whether it's talking about buying real estate or having the cash buried underground. We'll leave that for now. But a third should be invested in a business, okay, and a third should be readily available to him whenever he needs it. Okay, that way the Mefarshim explain that you spread out your risk, right? You have just enough money around available in case you need it for a business deal, and then you have it others, invested in other vehicles. So that's a really nice modern day money manager's way of looking at how to split up one's wealth or one's possessions. So that's one statement. So now Rav Yitzchak continues and says, and this is what we're going to focus on, a bracha is only found b'davar hasamur min ha'ayin. It's only found on something that we can't see. How do you know? Shenamar Yitzav Hashem itcha es habracha ba'asamecha. Okay, it's a pasuk we're going to look at in a minute in Parshas Kisavo in the Tochacha. It says that God will give you a bracha ba'asamecha. Now the word asamecha comes from the word osem. Right now, osem is not just a food company. It actually means in Hebrew a barn, right? A storage house for food. That's where the osem food got their name from this word over here, ba'asamecha. So we learn that asamecha is a play on words. It could also come from the word samoy, which is hidden. So it doesn't literally mean a barn over here. It means something that is hidden from the eye. Okay, again, the bracha is found only in something that we can't see. Okay. One last saying of Rav Yitzchak. Tana Debe Rav Yishmael. Ein habracha matzoy el bedavar she'ein ha'ayin sholetes bo. This is a very similar statement, but it's that a bracha is only found something that we can't see. Not that it's something that it's hidden, but we have no capability of having an ayin hara to it. That's when there's a bracha. Shenemar yitzav Hashem itcha es habracha ba'asamech. Okay, so that's the end of the Gemara. So let's just analyze the statement. Okay, we said a minute ago that the bracha is only found on something that we can see. It's davar hasamoy min ha'ayin. Okay, what does the pasuk say? The pasuk says, I'm reading, now it's important to know the context where these psukim come, because this is not a pasuk that's well known. The reason is because it's right before the tochacha starts. Okay, the tochacha, there's two tochachas in the Torah, one in the Chukosai and one in Kisavo. Okay, this is from the pasuk in Kisavo, where right before the curses start, God says, Yitzav Hashem itcha es habracha. God will ordain a bracha upon you, ba'asamecha, on your barns, ubechol mishlach yadecha, and on everything that your hand touches. Uberachacha ba'aretz asher Hashem elokecha noten lach, and you'll be blessed in the land that God gives you. So just an interesting note, I saw in the Ksava HaKabbalah, we use the word Yitzav. Now, Tzav usually means kiyum, it means a commandment, like Tzav. He says, Wildati ein ze lashon tzivoy upekida. This is not a usual word that the Torah uses for commanding. Usually the Torah would use commanding, but this is not that kind of a word. Right? God will command on you. Not Yitzav Hashem itcha. It's a bracha. It's a funny way of saying it. Yitzav itcha yitachen lomar. I'm reading from the Ksava HaKabbalah. Shuhu milashon tzavta besima haragil b'lashon hachachamim. Right? Umizeh vayitzav alav paro anashim. So he says it should be something that goes upon you, not necessarily a commandment. It's just something that is ordained on you, that is bestowed on you, not a literal commandment. So what is the reason? What is the reason why we have this concept of a bracha only coming on something that we can't see? Okay. So I'm quoting from the Marsha. The Marsha says over here, Shehu mishum ayin hara shel ha'adam shemonas es habracha milachol. Right? He says that it comes from the ayin hara, okay, which is, I didn't really want to talk about it. I just want to say one thing about the ayin hara. Okay, it's often misunderstood. Yeah.
So, just before you talk about the ayin hara, I want to mention that our friend George of blessed memory, he wrote an article about the ayin hara, and he studied it a lot his whole life. And tonight is his yortzeit.
I thought his yortzeit was a couple weeks ago.
Tonight is his yortzeit.
Oh. Okay. So I want to quote the Gemara in Arvei Psachim, Daf Kuf Yud Amud Beis. It's a very, very funny discussion, because the Gemara for 2 or 3 blot talks about the concept of ayin hara and shadim and zugos and all kinds of hocus pocus that we can't really relate to. But the Gemara says one line I just want to share, and that's all I'm going to say about ayin hara. It says klala demilsa. Kol de kapid kapti behadei, udelo kapid lo kapti behadei. The rule is that anybody or all of those people who are makpid, okay, about zugos and shadim and ayin hara, then those demons or that ayin hara is very, very makpid on him. But one who's not makpid on ayin hara, or i.e., as we would call it, doesn't let it bother you, then you have nothing to worry about. Lo kapid, lo kapti bahadei. And the words of the Rashbam over here is so that's basically the way the Rashbam explains it. The Gemara ends off by saying that at least you should be concerned a little bit about the harm, okay, that could come out of it, but basically don't focus on it. It's like, sometimes when you get if you get a bite, let's say, and the more you aggravate it and the more you scratch it, the more it's going to bother you. If you leave something alone, then it's not going to bother you as much. So you take that rule and you apply it over here, and it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, meaning if you let it get to you, then it will get to you. That's really the rule about all of these various, shadim and zugos and ayin hara. So that's, the only thing I really want to say about the ayin hara. But getting back to the Marsha says the reason why this concept exists about something that's hidden that we can't see is the only way to get the bracha is because if we're gazing at it, and the Gemara, I didn't finish the Gemara in Amafkid, the Gemara goes on to say, it's like when you count your wheat, right? You have to say the bracha, you have to hope that you get as much as you want before you actually see it. Because once you count it and once you see it, the bracha will not come. Okay? It'll get ruined. So the Marsha says it has to do simply with the concept of ayin hara. Ulochein, says the Marsha, rak b'davar shesamu min ha'ayin shalotas habracha mishum she'en ayin hara. Okay, there's a Torah Chaim that actually argues, and he says it has nothing to do with that. He hints to what we're going to see in a minute, the way the Rabbeinu Bechaya explains this concept. He says, "Mishum she'ein derech v'kavod hanes v'habracha lavo ela b'seiter." If you want a bracha or nes or something unnatural to happen, then you can't be privy to it. You can't witness it. It has to be done without you knowing. Right? When you don't know something, that's when you're more likely to be successful. Okay, very important words. Moshe Matzinu Etzel Elisha, right? He quotes the story, the famous story of Elisha Hashunamis, Sha'amar Le'esha Sovadia, right? Who told Ovadia's wife, she's the one, right, in the story, V'sagarta hadelet ba'adcha u'ba'ad banecha, right? When he was reviving the son that died, right? Okay. When he was reviving the son, Elisha commanded that the door be closed. Why? Tishra habracha ala shemen v'yisraba v'yismale, because that's when, right, the story where they were continuing to pour the shemen, right, and that itself was a miracle, right? But was the miracle that the oil kept on flowing, or was the miracle that the jugs kept on getting bigger and bigger? Okay, that's a discussion for some other time, for a bar mitzvah in Virginia. Okay, so getting back to our discussion, we have this concept of bracha samu min ha'ayin. So it's hard to learn this topic without looking at the very, very famous Rabbeinu Bechaya. Okay, the Rabbeinu Bechaya is, let me open it up, in the very beginning of Parshas Kitisa. Okay, Parshas Kitisa starts off talking about, as you know, the Machzis HaShekel and counting. Okay, and the Rabbeinu Bechaya, okay, starts off by saying, he quotes a pasuk, Yiras Hashem Tosef Yamim Ushnos Rishayim Tiktzarena. The Rabbeinu Bechaya talks about, I'm going to read a little bit of it. He says, the pasuk in Mishlei says that your days could be added if you're righteous, and your days could be numbered and cut short if you're wicked. He says, Kishnos ha'adam misarchin o miskatzrin lufi hazchutz v'ha'onish. Depending on whether you're zoche or not, that could depend on your lifespan. Zebederech nes nistar. And this is what we call a nes nistar. Okay, there's two types of miracles. There's something called a nes nistar, and he goes on to explain two kinds of miracles. Yesh nisim for samim, v'yesh nisim nistarim. There are hidden miracles, and then there's miracles out in the open. Hamaforsamim ham osos v'hamoftim hagdol masher nasu le'enei ha'amim ka'osos shel Mitzrayim be'eser hamakos u'bekriyas yamsuf v'yiridas haman v'hasla v'hotzas hamayim min hatzur hamishanim tivo u'minhagu shel olam. These is what we call biblical miracles. That happened a long time ago. None of us witnessed it. And none of us, 99% of us, will never witness something as grand as those kind of biblically proportioned miracles. Okay, that's what we call a nes nigla that everyone saw. Hanistarim hamamaisim hamikrim she'iru la'avos Avram Yitzchak v'Yaakov k'mechomas Avraham imamlachim v'nitzcho v'искabru aleim. Then there are hidden miracles like with Avraham in the 4 kings against the 5 kings. Even though you could say, oh, okay, it's a war and anyone could have won, it was considered a nes nistar. Right, tzadikim living longer than the average lifespan, the kitzer yemei harishayim, or rishaim that are not living as long. Hakol nes nistar. V'alzeh amar Shlomo yiras Hashem tosif yamim lefisha hadaiga v'hayira machlishim koach ha'adam, because worry and angst and anxiety decrease our lifespan. B'derech hateva umakrivin yemei misaso, it could cause people early death. V'amar Shlomo kimisha yesh bo yiras Hashem v'doag al avanosav erucha yamim. He goes on to say that if you act correctly, then you will live longer, and that's what's called a nes nistar. So then, skipping toward the end, now that he's described 2 different kinds of miracles, he says, he says over here, "V'zeu inyan yir haTorah bibrachos v'aklalos." When it comes to the tochacha, she'en lacha kol yachid v'yachid b'Yisrael, shelo ya'aru lo b'kol yom nisim nistarim. V'hu eno yodea. He says, nowadays, everything that happens to us is called a nes nistar. V'chen darshu razal ein ba'al hanes makir beniso. To the fact that the expression is, it happens so much that we don't recognize it anymore. Right? And to show that these miracles happen every single day. So if you want to experience a miracle, when you go in and you count your grain at the end of the week, at the end of the quarter, at the end of the year, Omer Yehiratzol Mefenecha Hashem Elokai V'Lohei Avosai, and this is the Gemara that we saw in Hamafkid, Shetishlach Bracha B'Kri Hazeh. Okay, that I'm hoping, I'm making a bracha that we should, that this grain should expand, that I should have more grain, more money, more whatever it is that we want. The imadad v'achakach berachah is a tefillah shav. But if you already counted, and then you said your bracha, then it's too late. She'en ha-bracha matzui lo b'davar hamadud v'lo b'davar hamanu v'lo b'davar hashakol el b'davar hasamu min ha'ayin. So, what's the explanation? Kivnu chachamim lomar bazeh shehanisim hanistarin hen b'chol yom b'yom. These miracles happen to us every single day, but it's better we don't know about it. That's what Rabbeinu Bachai's point is. V'hu b'davar she'eno manui u'madud. But it's something that is not counted. Because if the blessing is chal b'manur lo haya hanes nister elam meforsam, because he says if it turns into a different kind of miracle, meaning if I counted my money at the end of the quarter, I counted my wheat, and I wasn't happy, and I said a bracha, and then abracadabra, it grew. I had more money, I had more wheat. You're asking for a lot. That is what we call a nes nigla. That is a crazy miracle. That is not going to happen. So, ironically, we're better off not knowing. So that way we could have more, but not experience that nes nigla. Rather have a nes nistar so that you end up with more, rather than to have this nes nigla that probably won't happen for you. That's the calculation that the Rabbeinu Bachaya explains. He says, "Ki haisa habracha chal b'manu lo haya nes nister el meforsam. The ain't call Adam zochel nes meforsam." You're asking a lot. You're asking to be on a level, right, where once you saw your bank account and you log off and then you log on again and you have another $1 million, you're asking for a crazy miracle that probably won't happen. So therefore, better off not looking, says the Rabbeinu Bachaya. Amar Madar Vachagaklir says, how is it feel a shop? Shekiven Shenimdat Efshar Banes Nistar. Because once you already saw what you have, then you can't have any more miracles. The ayin hara sholetis be'etzem hadavar, and then you have the problem of the ayin hara. So that, by the way, is his connection to the machzis hashekel umitam zed sifsa haTorah shelo yimnu yisrael gugulotam ela bishkalim. So when we count, what's his connection to kitisa? When we count the Jews, we shouldn't count people. We should only count shkalim. So that we should be more, right, through this nes nistar v'shlo yishlach behen ayin hara hasholetes be'etzem hadavar. So that's a really beautiful thought as to why we're better off, at least in this context, not seeing or not knowing what we have, so that when we do make a bracha for it, whatever we end up has a better chance of being more than if we have seen it already. And, as soon as I saw this, so obviously everyone's, reaction is, well, that's why I never look at my stocks when they're down, because it just causes me, right? It just causes me unnecessary anxiety. So in fact, I saw an interesting article today that sounds exactly like that. Doesn't quote Rabbeinu Bachaya. It's from Personal Finance magazine. The article is called "Worried About Checking Your Portfolio? Don't be. Things are looking up." So he says, last year when the markets were miserable, my number one recommendation to my clients was simply do not check your portfolio. If you believe in the markets and the strength of the economy, you know and understand that downturns are typically a temporary occurrence. When you're constantly looking at your portfolio and seeing it going down, 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 you're setting yourself up to make snap decisions based on bias and emotion. Right? So we just learned that the problem is that you're going to want a miracle to happen, right? Says Rabbeinu Bachaya, and it's not going to happen because you're not on that level. So therefore, right? Therefore, you shouldn't look at it, say your bracha, right? And hope for the best. So here, the money managers are telling you that you're going to end up making bad decisions, or, like a knee-jerk reaction to sell or to get rid of something just because you're in a bad mood, right? Because you're seeing your investments go down. So you're going to end up making a bad decision based on bias and emotion, which isn't in your best financial interest. He says it's also not great for your mental health. Well, that goes without saying. So it's just an interesting way of, looking at it from a financial perspective today about, always, people who are always looking at, their worth or counting all the money every hour. Obviously, it's not good on that level, but as we saw from the Rebbeinu Bachaya, it doesn't give us a chance of experiencing this ness, because we're not on a level for a nes nigla, only for a nes nistar, and nes nistars only happen when we don't see it. So I thought that was a really interesting segue to a little bit of Lamaisa today. And on a related note, if you have a psachim available, I saw a related Gemara about brachos and the lack thereof in the beginning of the fourth parak of Psachim. And it's a little bit nogeya because we're going to learn some rules about Erev Pesach, which is coming up next week. So I thought it would be a neat connection between the two. I am in Psachim Daf Nun, Amud Aleph on the bottom. The Mishnah is about to talk about the concept of working on Erev Pesach. Okay, Erev Pesach back then was a real holiday, as opposed to today, it's a lead up to a holiday. But in fact, the term Pesach is not the 7 days that we celebrate or the 8 days we celebrate. It's actually, Pesach is the day before what we call Pesach. Chag HaMatzos is actually what the holiday is called biblically, but the biblical word for Pesach is the day of the 14th of Nisan, which is when we bought. That's why it's called the Pesach, because we in fact bought the Korban Pesach. So the Mishnah says that you are, depending on where you are, is you have to hold by the minhag of whether you're allowed to work that day of Erev Pesach or not. So the Mishnah starts off by saying, Makom shenahagu lasos malacha ba'arvei psachim ad chatzos osin. Makom shenahagu shelo lasos ein osin. Okay, we know the Mishnah a lot of times says a minhag is, the concept of a minhag is very strong. And if you're in a place where they worked before chatzos, now there's two times during the day. There's morning until chatzos, and then there's chatzos until nightfall. From chatzos until nightfall is not a discussion. That you're not allowed to do any malacha. The only question is, could I do malacha the first half of the day? Okay, so depending on where you are is what the ruling is. The Mishnah says, "Haholach makom she'osin l'makom she'ein osin, or makom she'ein osin l'makom she'osin." What if you normally have one minhag, and the program you're on has a different minhag, or the place that you go has a different minhag? So the Mishnah says, and this rule is the rule that we use when it comes to a lot of minhagim. Okay, whenever it's mentioned in Shas, basically, we have to go l'chumra. Okay, so that's the first half of the Mishnah. So Rashi over here explains what would be the reason why you can't do malacha on Erev Pesach. Okay, so Rashi says, let's just first read Rashi and then we'll see Tosfos. So Rashi says, Shalo lasos kedei shalo yehei tarod b'malacha, because you don't want to be bothered with work. The yishkach bir chimtzo u'shchitas haPesach. He says, well, what's going on in Erev Pesach? It's a very busy day. You have to get rid of your chametz. You have to get the korban ready, right? B'tikun matzah, l'tzorach halayla, and then you have to get the matzah ready. Okay, for that night. The mitzvah litroach miba'od yom kedei lahasev maher kedamrina perak basra. Rashi quotes chot v'n matzah b'lipsachim. You have to get the matzah ready. You have to grab it. Mishvil tinokos. Okay, whatever it is. Basically, you're a busy guy in Erev Pesach, and therefore that would be the reason why there may be a minhag in your area of not working. Okay, that's all according to Rashi. Tosfos says, I'm reading the Tosfos on top. There's one Tosfos on the daf on Nun Amud Aleph. Tosfos says, Omari, the first be Yerushalmi, Maishna Arve Psachim. Why is Pesach different than any other Yontif? Mishum Dizman HaPesach Mechatzos ve'elech. Because the Pesach is from Chatzos and Elech, right? Midday and on. That's when the korban was bought. He says, Va'af Yachid Kamar Hasan B'Shar Yemos Hashana B'Yom Shemei V'Korban Asur b'mlacha. This is the reason Tosfos says. Tosfos says it has nothing to do with being busy getting your chametz, getting your matzah, getting your Pesach, getting your korban ready. It has to do with the fact that when a person would bring a korban, it was your personal yontif, and on your personal yontif, you are not allowed to work. That's the rule. Your yontif, there's a inyan of asiyas malacha. Okay, that's what Tosfos says. Tosfos asks a really interesting question. I'm just going to skip a little bit. Tosfos says, if you skip a little bit, he says toward the end, he says, hold on a second. How about the Talmud? Right? Wasn't the Talmud bought every day? Now, true, that was an Ola, it was a communal, but still everyone had a chelik in it. Tosfos says, he says, Uparach imken korban tamid, shehu kol Yisrael, b'karv b'chol yom, yehei b'chol yom, asr b'mlacha. Nobody would ever allowed to work. Shmuel, you like this kasha? Nobody would ever be allowed to work every day, Tosfos asks, because the Talmud was bought. So you ready for this answer? So Tosfos says, Umishani shiny Talmud shehatorah hotzio min haklal. Talmud is an exception. Why? Because we have no choice. What are you going to say? Not to work? V'hatorah amra d'chsiv v'asafta deganecha. V'im kol Yisrael yoshemu b'teilim mi yasef lehem dagon. But this is a really interesting answer. He says, well, so what are you going to, meaning this is a kasha that obviously has an answer to it. So Tosfos says, okay, so playing your game, right, of not working, how are you going to be Makayim, okay, v'asafta deganecha? So therefore, the Talmud is different. So I saw an unbelievable kasha posed. Let me open it up. Posed by the Chazon Ish. Says the Chassam Sofer. The Chassam Sofer says, why is Tosfos bringing the pasuk of Yasafta Deganecha? He says, V'kashali dahaver lasuya mishesh yasamim tavod v'asita kol malachtecha the mekodem. Tosfos brings a pasuk of V'asafta Deganecha. What is V'asafta Deganecha? V'asafta Deganecha is the commandment that we are allowed to work. And if you remember the Gemara in Brachos, the Lamed Hey says it's either V'asafta Deganecha or learning all day. Right? Harbe Asu, right? That's the whole famous Gemara by Rav Shimon ben Yochai. Is it better to work? Is it better to learn? And the Gemara says, well, we tried it one way, it didn't work. So now we got to work. But V'asafta Deganecha is like a heter. It allows us to work. So why go all the way to Parshas Ekev? If you open up the Chumash from the first page and find the first source that we have to work, it would be from the 10 Commandments, right? Sheish yasamim tavod ve'asita kol malachtecha, right? That's the better pasuk to tell us that we have to work. So he answers, no. He says, "V'zu leisa the ein lomar sheish yasamim yasa malachto defshar lomar sheish yasamim yasa malachto leochel nefesh." There's no, because you could translate the word malacha like it says in Bo, like right? Right? That kind of malacha. The word malacha doesn't mean what we refer to as work. It means the ochel nefesh. It means just like the malacha of ochel nefesh, meaning, yeah, the only thing we could do is just cook to survive. As opposed to ubayom hashvi'i lo yaseh shum malacha klala, even ochel nefesh. So you could work by cooking during the week to survive. But on Shabbos, you can't cook at all. Even if it's ochel nefesh, you have to prepare it from before. So that's the way I would learn. But now that we have Asafta Deganecha doesn't use the word malacha. It uses the word, it describes what malacha you're doing. The word malacha is a tricky word. It doesn't mean like the word work, like we would use the word work, right? It could mean something else. That's why Tosfos had to come on to ve'asata diganecha shehi meleches avoda. That is the actual verb of doing physical work. So that's why Tosfos picked ve'asata diganecha. I thought that was just a cute sidebar on that. So let's go back. We have Rashi, okay, that says that the reason of malacha on Erev Pesach has to do with you're going to forget to do all your chores because you'll be bogged down, right, with work, and you won't get to the chametz, and you won't get to the matzah, you won't get to the korban. Tosfos says, no, it has to do with this concept of not working on the day that you bring a korban, okay? And the Ritva brings down Rabbeinu Zrachia, which is the Baal Hamor. He says, "Ki lefiha Yushalmi ein hakorban dino kishar hayam tovim kol hayam toli b'menik." He says this doesn't apply anymore. Says the Baal Hamor, because today there's no korban, so therefore there's no real problem. You just have to go based on your minhag. And the Ritva brings the Ramban, who says sheze eno she'ein ha'im ken hayishonim. Okay, he says Ramban says you can't say that just because it doesn't apply anymore. Once they lay down this law, you can't say, well, there's no Beis Hamikdash, there's no korban. So if there's no korban anymore, then you have nothing to worry about, and you could work if you want. No, that's not how it works. The Gzeira stands even if the reason doesn't apply anymore, right? This is that very large topic that, right, in the beginning of Masechah Shabbos, right, that the Gemara over there talks about doing Gzeiros, even if the reason doesn't apply anymore. So that's why the Ramban attacks the Baal Hamor and says, you still have to follow this rule, even though there are no korbanos anymore. Okay, so that's I saw, by the way, a interesting question. Gemara, according to Rashi, who says that we have this problem of being busy with all kinds of things. What about on Sukkot? Aren't we busy with a sukkah? So according to Rashi, you should have the same problem, right? You should have the same problem on Erev Sukkot, right, of not doing any work either. So, in fact, this question was asked by the Magid Mishnah in the Rambam, and he says, "She'erev Pesach chaluk me'erev Sukkot." Why is it different? She'besukkos reason makdimin lasos es sukkah b'motzei yom HaKippurim. He says, "Well, hold on a second. When was your commandment to put up the sukkah? Right? It says right after Yom Kippur ends, so you have a good 4 days to put up the sukkah." Umishum kach be'erev sukkos eno tarid basiyasa. So erev sukkos, you shouldn't leave it for the last minute. Avo be'erev pesach hu tarid ba'fias hamatzah. So this is something that we aren't used to because we know that we bake a week before, 2 weeks before. Some people go to Lakewood even a month before to bake matzahs. But the Lecha Mishnah brings down that they would actually bake the matzahs on Erev Pesach. I never heard of this before. Shenahagu lo lahaktim esafiyaso kodem shashishis. They would start baking the matzahs on the 6th hour on Erev Pesach. Right? Kemavor b'Yushalmi, and the Lecha Mishnah brings down a Yerushalmi, Shematzah Yishana Psula. Right?
Yeah, we did that every year here. We baked it every year, Pesach.
In the middle of the day on Erev Pesach?
Yeah, after Chatzos.
Wow, okay. Very good.
Baked it every year, but now I don't do it anymore because I go away. I used to bake every year.
Very nice. Befen Kasavatur, She'en Lafoso Kodim Shashish, the Torah says you have to wait until all the way past the 6th hour. Umipnei Kach, says the Lecha Mishnah, Be'erva Pesach Shehu Torid, Lachen Asr Lasos Malach. That's why the problem is only on Pesach as opposed to Sukkot. I thought that was interesting. The Rambam, by the way, when he quotes this law about working, the Rambam says, "Asar l'tzos malacha ba'arbe yomim tovim min amincha ulamala, k'mo arbe shabbasos v'chol ha'osei malacha behen einu roa siman bracha la'olam." Whoa, right? We're back to that again, siman bracha. Okay, that's why we brought this Gemara down. The Gemara is actually going to quote it. I'm actually going to pick up on Daf Nun Amud Beis before we get to finish the Rambam. The Gemara wants to know, my irya arve psachim afilu arbe Shabbos yom tovim nami. This concept of working is on Erev Shabbos also. We might not know this today, but you also shouldn't really work close to when Shabbos starts. How do you know? Right? The money that you think you're going to make by staying in the office late to make that trade right before Shabbos starts, the Gemara tells you, I guarantee you, it's not going to end up good. All right? That's what the Gemara says. So if that's true, then isn't Erev Shabbos no different than Erev Pesach? So the Gemara ends off by saying, La'olam, I'm sorry, Hasamin Amincha Ulam Alahuda, so Samach Lamincha Lo. There, it's only after Mincha Gedola, right? But close to Mincha, no. But Hacha, when it comes to Erev Pesach, that, right, you know, there's 6.5 hours, there's 9.5 hours, one's Mincha Tana, one is Mincha Gedola. But when it comes to Pesach, we're machmir more and says it starts exactly at Chatzos. Again, which on a 6 to 6 day is at 12 o'clock. When it comes to Erev Shabbos, yeah, you may not see a bracha from that money, but we put you in chayrim. Here, I'm sorry, there they won't put you in chayrim. Here, the chacham have the power to put you in chayrim. The Gemara goes on to say, Ha'osa malacha gufa ha'osa malacha b'arba shabbosos yom tovim min amincha ulamala b'motzei Shabbos motzei yom tov motzei yom kippurim b'chol makom sheyesh sham nidnud aveira. Anytime it's possible to err and to work on Yontif, either before or after, right, by not waiting until Shabbos is over and working right away, okay, we say Eino roa siman bracha la'olam. Okay, you'll never ever see a bracha from that money that you think you're going to make. Right now, I want to read a little bit longer because a little bit more because this is a very interesting line we're about to see. Yesh zaris v'niskar v'yesh zaris v'nifsad. Yesh shafel v'niskar v'yesh shafel v'nifsad. You know what? I'm going to skip that because it's 10 minutes left. I just want to go to. I want to skip a little bit about Eno Roa Siman Bracha La'olam. The Gemara says, Hamistaka b'kanamu b'kankanim. If you do business with rods or with reeds or with like bamboo or with big jugs of oil or wine, Eno Roa Siman Bracha La'olam. Another thing, it's another bad sign. Okay, my timer. Even the nafish apachsayu shalta behu ena. Okay, I said I wasn't going to talk about the ayin hara, but the truth is that there's one last mention of the ayin hara tonight, and that's it. When you deal with large items, people tend to look at you, and when people look at you, they wonder, "Wow, those are really right. That material is really big. How do you handle it?" And when you have people start to creep into your life and to start asking questions, you know, you're dealing with the ayin hara again. I want to end off by one interesting Gemara that's on this topic. Tanar Abanan. Posfe, I'm sorry. Let me just... There are 4 people who, when they make money, they'll never see a bracha from it. So, schar kosvin, uschar meturgamanim, people who are scribes, sofrim, people who are Maturgamanim. Okay, they're the ones who translate the shir that's given on Shabbos by the rabbi. Uschar Yisomim, people who deal with Yisomim's money. Umos Abosim Dinasiyam, money from overseas. So Gemara says at the end, I don't understand why it says Sofrim don't make money. It's not fair. So the Gemara says, my time, Rabbi Shua ben Levi, Taf Dal Taniyos of Yashvu Anshe Knesses Agadola Al Kosfei Svarim Tfilin Mezuzos Shelo Yisashru. The Anshe Knesses Agadola begged God 24 different times that Sofrim should not be profitable. Why? She'ilmalamis Ashrin and Kosfin. Because if they made too much money and were too comfortable, they would never go back to work, and we would have no tefillin, we'd have no mezuzahs, we'd have no svarim. So in a weird way, let's say that, we need to keep the sofrim at bay and make sure that they don't make money and let them continue doing their work. I just wanted to end off by a word I heard, a really, really nice memra from the Haflah. The Haflah says, if you look, again, this goes back to Sofrim. If you look at, there's a Rashi in Parshas Vayechi. When it comes to the bracha, Birchas Yaakov, by Shimon and Levi, right? Shimon and Levi were partners in crime, right? Yaakov wasn't too happy with them. So their bracha, not really such a great bracha. It says, Arura Pam Kiyaz, right? Cursed be their anger. Vevrasam Kikashasa, their wrath is relentless. Achal Kaim bi Yaakov, I'll divide them, Va'afitzem bi Israel, and scatter them throughout Israel. So there's a Rashi that says, what does that mean? Achal Kaim bi Yaakov, I'll separate them. So says Rashi, Davarach. He gives one interpretation. Ein lecha aniyim v'sofrim umulamde tinokos elam Shimon. You know what Shimon and Levi have in common? That Shimon, says Rashi, all of the Shimon is going to have poor people and sofrim and teachers. That's who's going to come out of Shimon. Okay, the people who don't make a lot of money. Kidei sheyeh nefutzim, right? In order so that the tribe should be dispersed, right? Because people who are poor have to wander, right, from city to city to make a livelihood. The shifto shel Levi asu machazar al agronos. Now, what are Levi? Levium are all about collecting, so they don't have money either. They get supported by other people. So you have Shimon who's going to be supported, and you're going to have Levi that's going to be supported, right? Nasan lotfuta derech kavod, right? So he caused them to be scattered, a little bit more respectable than Shimon, but nevertheless, we see that Shimon and Levi were not destined for Ashiros. And what's a proof that they weren't destined for Ashiros? At least Shimon, because if you skip to V'zos HaBracha, you'll notice that all of the Shvatim got brachas. Yechi Ruvain Val Yamos, Levi Amar Tumecha V'recha, Yehuda got a bracha. Every single tribe in Zos HaBracha got a bracha. I don't know if anyone ever noticed this, except Shimon. So Rashi gives a reason in Zos HaBracha why Shimon was left out, because of the sin that Zimri, that the leader of Shimon, if you remember at the end of Bamidbar, Zimri ben Salu, he sinned with Kazi Vasur, that whole story. But the truth is what is the common denominator of all the brachos in Zos HaBracha? The Haflah says it's all about Ashiras, right? All the Shvatim, it's money and power and this and right. They all have, right, Zvulun, Yisachar, right? Every single common denominator is all about Ashiras. That's why Shimon was left out, and that's why, getting back to our Gemara, it's very weird. Okay, the Sofrim, they don't make a lot of money, but why did the Anshe Knesses Hagdola have to pray that the Sofrim stay poor? That's exactly why, says the Haflah, because they needed to be Makayim, that promise of Moshe, that everyone is going to be in Ashir except for Shimon. That's why Nebuch, all of the Sofrim come from Shimon. What do you think about that, Shmuel?
I don't know.
Being a
I don't
Sofer.
charge for my things. So,
Right. Okay. I
but I
guess
was thinking about if you have something big, a bracha doesn't go on a big object.
right. Right.
What's an
So
example of a big object?
Kanim.
What?
Kankanim.
Oh, okay.
Anyways, okay. That's it for tonight.
Shkoyach.
We'll take a break for a couple of weeks. Chag kasher v'sameach.